Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Hollywood Breaks. This week we swap out Tims. Thompson disappeared into Europe somewhere, so we bring Tim Heindl back to the scene. Tim and I reminisce about our days in Avatar. We talk about the swaps of the Bobs, what that means for Disney. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Hollywood Breaks. So we should probably talk about the Bobs, because it seems to me that seems to be the dominant conversation. And I'm curious what your perspective is, because you're the research guy, and there's a lot of talk about the strategy that Chapek was pursuing that some people say Iger kind of put in place. And now it seems to be Iger's set him up to fail, basically, and then start bad mouthing him from the sidelines. And it seems like now Iger's in place, and mere weeks ago he gave an interview where he said, I don't think theatrical's ever going to come back to pre-COVID times, and linear's going off a cliff. So I'm like, oh well, you're going to have a shitload of fun on your first day in the job there, Bob. So
Can you imagine?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was about yesterday, and it sort of was talking a little bit about, I guess Disney had hired McKinsey, the consultancy, to sort of figure out a way to save money and cut costs. And obviously the first thing they went after was marketing, and potentially moving marketing away from the content creators and putting it into Kareem Daniels' group.
Right.
And sort of like creating like a central hub for marketing, and then the creator content teams just focus on producing the content, and then Kareem figures out where it's going to go, and then the marketing sort of streams from that, which in my mind isn't necessarily a terrible idea, but of course it all depends on the execution.
Yes.
So I'm curious, like, do you think Bob Iger is going to go right back to how things were? I mean, he gave his town hall where he said, well, creative is the center of attention now, which is all well and good, but the landscape is completely different from when Iger was last in that chair. So how do you think things are going to shake out for him now in the next, few months?
A lot of backpedaling, right? Because he did make
a little bit.
A lot of backpedaling. It was an interesting model. I almost wish they had let the experiment run a little longer, because it didn't there was enough data in this model, I think, to really prove it one way or the other. It felt like a very reactionary move on the part of driven by, skittish shareholders that ended up in the position they're in. It's in part also, it's like Bob Iger is like a warm blanket, right? Like everything's going to be okay now.
Warm glass of milk.
Everything's going to be okay. Don't you worry. Your pretty little creative heads.
Papa's back now. Everything's all well and good. Chill out.
It's such a it's in some ways too, it's reflective of a kind of persistent tension that I think is going to continue to grow as we move through this new iteration of the industry, between the creative voices and the business side of the operation, the distribution, which is clearly just a business play. How do you the thing that I felt like was a false dichotomy from the beginning, because it's the supposition that someone in distribution, which is some of the smartest people in the industry, and it's not a slight at all, but in isolation can make decisions about optimal platform and optimal audience and optimal release schedule is I think a fool's errand. And it has to be so interwoven with marketing and interwoven with the creatives that it has to be a synergistic entity, as it always has been, and as all studios have always been. Like that entity, that energy is concentrated, but it's balanced across all of those separate kind of divisions, not controlled by one over the other. And I get how I can understand how creatives would be feeling a little, filmmakers in particular, feeling a little skittish about that kind of instability. And are we have our movie people in there? Are we talking to the right people?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed to me it was odd. I agree with you. I would like to have seen it play out a little bit more. I thought the idea of it was sort of in the right direction, because it was sort of like trying to establish sort of like a more data-driven, decision-making process. But I think there was just a level, to your point about the filmmakers, there's just a level of confusion about who Kareem Daniel is, what Disney media and entertainment distribution, and what their job was, what their role is. And it didn't seem like a lot of the managers, like Alan Bergman at the Disney Studios, didn't really seem like there was I mean, Chapek claimed there was buy-in, but clearly there wasn't, because it seemed like there was just a disconnect from the get-go. And I think when you had like, you know, you had a couple of like the Pixar movies. I think it was it Red Tail? Was that the name of it?
Red Dawn.
Not
Red Dawn.
Red Dawn. Not Red Dawn. Although I would love to see a Pixar version of Red Dawn.
Come on, it's blanking on it, but yes.
Yes, you know what I'm talking about.
The movie about young women's adolescence.
Correct. That they just moved to Disney Plus. Didn't even give it a theatrical release. And then you have Hocus Pocus 2, which was a huge hit on Disney Plus, and Disenchanted, which had star power at the wazoo and was dumped on Disney Plus. You have to think, like, was there a theatrical play there that did they leave money on the table? And I sort of made this in a previous Founders Brew, I made this comment when Chapek was at the Wall Street Journal tech conference, and he said, like, listen, if you're going to play in this streaming game, it's about scale. And I said, yes, he's right, but you have to scale smartly. And it felt like what he was doing was just scaling to the point of just eyeballs and subscribers versus like scaling to make money, which is sort of the point. And, you know, it seems to me that that kind of just started to fall apart with Hocus Pocus 2 and Disenchanted, and investors and the board being like, how much money are we leaving on the table here? And so I think you're right. I think it just, it needs to be.
That's almost an impossible question to answer, isn't it? Like, how much money are we leaving on the table? It's so speculation, but like there's a there. Someone can figure that out. Someone should know that, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I think because there is sort of a disconnect between an audience that sort of consumes a studio product, if you will, like the Netflix and the Amazons of the world are not really playing that same game because they have direct connection with the audience. They have data of the audience. The industry and the studio side has always sort of used a third party to sort of transact. So we would never, ever really get that data. So it felt like this could have been an opportunity to maybe try to figure out a way to communicate more with the consumer, and maybe work in a way with, you know, the creatives to create a seamless process to figuring out where things go and how they should be marketed. I think there was a little also disconnect between, like, when you choose a platform, that marketing is just sort of can be across all platforms. Like, you know, if you're going to put it on streaming, the marketing plan is exactly the same. But to me, that shows a little bit of an ignorance in terms of how marketing strategy works. Like, theatrical release is not the same as a streaming release. And it felt like at times that Kareem's division was making a decision like, oh, you can just pivot to streaming. It's easy. It's not a big deal, where it's actually a big deal.
I know.
So more seamless would have been better. But I'm really curious, like, what Iger's next moves are going to be, and, you know, and it seems to me that we were just talking in the pre-show that there seems to be almost like a slight slant towards back to theatrical when you have like Netflix with their, you know, Glass Onion experiment, and then you have Amazon also commenting on potentially making up to $1 billion into a theatrical commitment, which is like, I'm sorry, what? So
bring it.
It's like great.
After their reinvention or revisitation of Lord of the Rings, I am all in on whatever they want to spend their money on. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it feels like, I mean, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but do you feel like Iger is right that we're never going to get back to pre-COVID levels, or do we have to adjust to a new reality?
I think he's right in the sense that we need a whole new ecosystem, is what I feel like is the early signals are that maybe Disney was doing, that was the right path, but they're 5 years ahead of the curve. Right. And so you bring the other Bob back to kind of like calm the water. And in the meantime, I think the other question that you're raising, and something I've been like, a lot of people have been thinking about, is how do you make the smartest determination of how to optimize your content? Like, how do I know something is innately theatrical versus something is ideal for a streamer? There's a difference, and it's not immediately apparent given the current tools, and I think anyway, means of assessing it that we have available to us right now. So it's still a little bit of a guessing game. To your point about Hocus Pocus, that would have crushed. I mean, even now, just looking at the release schedule for the holidays, there's nothing until like Puss in Boots, and then Avatar. And
Yeah.
then Whitney Houston and kind of Babylon, maybe, but that's 3 hours. And then you're so there's a massive hole to me.
Yeah.
Spirited, for example, would have done some bonkers business had Apple Plus decided to give that a little bit of a theatrical run. But everyone's kind of figuring it out on the fly and experimenting simultaneously.
Yeah.
Which gives a false impression that there's a sense people know what they're doing, but really,
Nobody knows what
I think
they're
they're just feeling it out. I mean, how does
Yeah.
like I was talking with some friends at Netflix, and like I'm like, this is such a curious experiment for you guys because you've had a semi pre-theatrical traditional release campaign into this very potent window, which they, by all accounts anyway, in those limited theaters did exceptionally well.
Yeah.
Good on them. Now it's gone until the 23rd of December. So there's 21 days of like, I can't see that anywhere, right? So you got all that energy you built up, good word of mouth, that's you have this ball of energy that now has from now until the 23rd sort of just sit there, right? And people are going to continue talking about the movie sufficiently that when you re-engage the consumers at Christmas, they're going to be like, oh, you're back.
Oh, hello, look at this.
I think that's where they're leaving money on the table, is that not like there's a miscalculation, it feels like to me, in terms of the demand they built and then how that demand either dissipates or accelerates across the different release windows. And that's what we'll see. We'll see when they come back at Christmas how the run goes for them. And I mean, rebook it then at that point too, which is also another fascinating little twist on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me. My wife and I were talking after we dropped off the kids this morning, and she said, like, where are all the Christmas movies? And I'm like, well, there's Avatar. She looks at me, she's like, that's not a Christmas movie. I'm like, I know, I'm just kidding. Because, that consumed my life, all of our lives for like the entire first quarter of 2009. So, but you're right. Like Spirited, that could have had a shot. I mean, it seems like people are just so committed to one way or another versus just, maybe this could have a real shot. I mean, it surprises me that Netflix didn't try to give it a little bit more of a theatrical push, because
they gave it any.
And the one way is it's so clear right now, and we're coming into a holiday season where I think a lot of people are just kind of most people feel like the pandemic is over. Everyone's kind of going back to normal, and it seems like this would be the time to like really try to push movies that you would traditionally put in theaters on during the holiday season. And it's, obviously Chris Aronson and Paramount recognize that because he's putting Top Gun back in theaters for 2 weeks because there's nothing else there.
Exactly.
So why not? So, like, hey, what do you want to do? Well, I already saw Wakanda Forever. I don't really know what else to see. So yeah, let's go watch Top Gun. And, because who doesn't want to watch Top Gun 2 again? Because it's such a great movie. So why not?
Right.
It just seems to me that, I mean, I'm partially heartened by it because it seems like it's starting to tick back, but there's also the pessimist side of me that's like, well, the experience hasn't changed at all. So is it going to remind people how shitty the movie theaters are? Or is it going to be like one of those things where they're like, oh, I remember how great this was. I don't care if the floor is sticky.
Yeah.
And, there's a pimpled teenager running the projector. I just want to be in an experience where it's communal again. So I don't know. I think you're right. I think a lot of people are experimenting, and I have to give Chapek a little bit of credit because I think that's what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
He was experimenting. He's like, you know what? This model has been played out since the 60s. We need to shake it up a little bit. So I'm going to take the P&L power away from the heads who aren't all together the smartest math majors anyway, the people who run the content side of the business, and see if we can maybe create a division that sort of can handle all that stuff and sort of make it more evidence and data based.
Yeah.
Which was worth trying. I mean, you're right. I wish he would have given a little bit more time to see it, but maybe he wasn't exactly the leader to effectuate it, because when you're taking on a legacy industry and a legacy company like Disney, you have to have a certain sense of emotional intelligence. And I'm not sure
performance, right? And Bob Iger gave that performance very much.
Yes,
very much so.
I think
he had a theatrical presence.
Yes, he did. And if Chapek had at least tried to sort of come at it from that perspective, perhaps he could have gotten a little bit more buy-in versus sort of almost being like a bull in a china shop and being like, well, we need to just break everything because this model isn't working anymore. And it's almost like, because he really never had an experience with creatives and creative people who can obviously sometimes have huge egos but be very emotionally fragile. Like, it's not the same thing as dealing with, how do we get the ride? It's a small world to move at a faster clip. That's not really the same conversation. So, I'm excited about the time of sort of experiment. And
it is cool. It is cool.
I try to look at it from a more optimist perspective than being the pessimist and sort of the sky is falling.
It's evolution, and it's we came out of like this. We're already, I think, underestimating the significance of the period of time we just went through historically, the impact it's had on us.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing like the manifestation of this in entertainment is like a place like Apple is there, and Netflix, everyone still is calculating their ROIs and doesn't quite have it dialed in yet. They'll get there. A lot of these are like, they're vanity plays for sure. There's a lot of like posturing, that we're the new kids in town and we got the biggest checkbooks, and like that's sort of, I feel like that's fading a little bit. We're settling back down into a space of understanding both the best way to make determinations about where to release something, and then what we should be making more or less of. I think it's still also like very much in flux, right? The nature of our audience has evolved and is continuing to evolve. We have like, even before the pandemic, of course, there was a the bread and butter of theatrical was a like young, slightly Latin skewing consumer. It's even gotten more concentrated now post pandemic. That's a segment that is like that has only found even more of a space within theaters, but now it's just a matter of keeping them engaged and appeased, while bringing back the pedigree viewers and bringing back the older females and the audiences that were immediately African American audiences that were initially more reluctant to return. So it's cool. Someone's going to crack this code and just be a zillionaire.
Yeah, Tim, why don't you and I get on this? We should just get on this, right? Like, you and I should.
It's such a cool puzzle. You need like a math guy and we're good. Person.
Well, then we're off. I mean, it's funny because, when the great Netflix correction, as they call it, when all of a sudden the investors sort of flipped on a dime. Before it was all about how many subscribers. Like, that was like the big thing. And then all of a sudden everyone was like, well, wait a minute, we got to figure out, how are you guys going to make money off this? And I think that's it's a combination of the interest rates going up, which means debt becomes more expensive. And as a result of all that, it's not just about how many subscribers you have. It's like, okay, well, now you have to make money because you got to pay down more expensive debt. So I think that started the conversation of like, okay, it's not just about chasing subscribers, which, pivoting back a year or two ago to Jason Kilar's philosophy of like dumping everything on HBO Max because I've got to get the streamer service up and running and got to drive people. And that was all about subscribers. And now it's beginning, you're like you said, the conversation is shifting again, where it's like, okay, how are we best able to monetize everything we have? And maybe the other thing is, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm talking out loud, it's like, maybe it's to stop talking, just calling it content. Maybe we need to start talking more about what is a movie and a theatrical movie versus a streaming movie versus just calling it content, because maybe that amorphous term that sort of like gathers everything under one rubric maybe is becoming.
I like that because it's content's like commodified too.
Like,
it's a product.
Exactly. It's not art, man. Come on. But it's like, because to me, it's like, and Tim and I have always talked about this. My big thing is like, what's a movie anymore? Like, does anybody really know? Can you define what a movie is anymore? Like, if I'm watching the latest Will Smith blockbuster on my TV, then is it still a movie? Because then that qualifies like the Hallmark Channel Christmas movie as
Yeah,
a
very much in
movie.
flux. It's all very much in flux. And it's an
Yeah,
arbitrary time distinction, isn't it? Like a
yeah.
movie technically is just a bounded narrative within a 90 to,
So yeah, well, now,
time
well, it's not
limit.
really bounded anymore. It's like you
No,
can
it's
go up to
not.
what,
Jesus,
3.5 hours.
buddy.
And as I get older, it's harder and harder to sit in the theater and not have to go to the bathroom. I want to bring back the intermissions. That would make it easier.
Oh, then you're gonna say bring back the diapers.
Well, you can do that too, but I'm talking like bringing back the intermissions, like so I can take a break and go get some food and
No,
bathroom
don't
break
worry.
kind of
I'm
thing.
sure that'll happen. For
Yeah,
Babylon, it's 3 hours. I can't believe that's 3 hours.
it's 3 hours. Is it
308.
really
Yeah, that's bonkers.
3 hours?
Yeah. Even the next John
Wow,
Wick is under 3. It's like 2 and
3
2:45, I think.
hours. Well, what's the new Avatar? That's almost 3, right? It's
Yeah.
not even, but it's not over 3,
No.
right?
No.
Wow, what is Damien doing? 3
Whatever the
hours?
fuck he wants, whatever he wants.
I will say this though, that campaign is rock star. They are clearly now all the other typical headaches of working on a campaign aside, they're clearly having fun working on this one. You could see it. Having been in bays with editors, whenever you can always see when they're having fun cutting something when you're watching the trailer, because you feel it. You can feel that they had fun cutting that together and working with the beats, and like it's a trailer is like basically a symphony, and it's you just watch it all come together and you can get a kind of feel, and it just feels like fun. But man, 3 hours. Oof. Okay, I gotta
really well. Cuts really well.
I may have to recalibrate my viewing choices over the holiday. So because 3 hours, it's a lot of time. I can't do Avatar. I can't do a double feature of Avatar and Babylon. That's kind of out.
Bring a sleeping bag.
Yeah, I'm bringing a sleeping.
Change of clothes, for God's sake.
Yeah, right. Speaking of Avatar, so you and I obviously we worked on the original, which was 13 years ago, which is hard to believe. Yeah, right. Sorry, I just dated us. But it's interesting because I in the moment it was a stressful campaign. I mean, you were there when we were all trying to figure out how we're going to sell this thing, all the focus groups we did, Thunder Smurfs. Wait, is this Avatar the cartoon? Like all the things we were dealing with during that campaign, trying to figure out how we were going to thread this needle. Well, we all had metaphorical bankers boxes in the corner of our office if it didn't work, because we all knew we were probably going to get fired. But it's interesting because I just think back on those days. Obviously, I remember it fondly. It was a great time. It was stressful as hell, but it was one of those moments where, because we worked on that movie and that movie alone for 4 straight months, which doesn't really happen much these days, didn't really happen much back then, but that was really the only movie we worked on, because there was all the resources were behind making that movie work. And it's just, to me, like sort of watching it now and seeing the campaign they're putting together, and it's very similar to what we went through. I mean, it's when we work on Avatar, it had been 9 years, I think, since Titanic, if I'm not mistaken. So nobody really knew who Cameron was. They had kind of lost his thread. And it seems 13 years later, now they have a multi-billion-dollar movie that was like #1 at the box office for multiple years. And now it feels like they have the same challenges. Like they have to reintroduce the characters. Nobody really remembers the characters' names. And then you also have this aspect of like Cameron is not front of mind anymore. I mean, you can still throw out his resume, but that means something to you and I. It doesn't necessarily mean something to the younger generation, who they obviously need to show up this movie if it's going to hit the now $2 billion target that Cameron has set for the movie itself.
So it is interesting. I've been watching this too, and it's interesting you say that, because I have to disengage my own biased POV, because I see it and I'm like, I get the warms, I get the fuzzy, right?
Yes.
Every shot is just like a take back into that space. But that was a long time ago. It was it's tracking like a gargantuan $200 million opener, which is pretty spectacular. But
that's awesome.
I don't feel the same It's hard. It is impossible actually to disengage from that because I don't feel the same anxiety about this one. I feel like that Avatar 1 laid such a powerful foundation that
Mhm.
this is just reawakening that, and it's just going to be like this explosion. The timing of it too is, I think, really important to the regeneration of the theatrical kind of experience and industry, because this is, to me, the quintessential definition of theatricality is the
Yes.
immersiveness of, like, brings you into a world in a way that no one else has yet, right? So that is, I think, gonna give
But
another little like EpiPen to the heart of
yeah, but do you think like the audience has moved on though? Do you, I mean,
yeah.
I look at, well, you mean obviously you have more research data than I do, but I honestly, to be up front, I didn't get the warm and fuzzies from some of the shots. I just felt like, granted, I'm watching on an HD TV. I'm not in the theater, and I'm sure in the theater. And again, I qualify this every time I talk about Avatar that I'm never betting against James Cameron. I mean, I'm no, just not going to
Yeah,
happen.
yeah.
So it's entirely possible the movie's going to be amazing. In fact, it probably will be. But my thing is, like, I watch the spots, and I'm like, I don't. There's nothing there that wants is pulling at me. Like,
You're
I
not
don't.
rooting. You're not feeling the journey.
I'm not. I don't know why. I mean,
Yeah.
I again, it could be because I'm too much in the weeds on this, and I worked on the original, and it's just sort of like I see all the tricks, and but at the same time, it's like I haven't seen a shot. Like, I was talking, we were watching, and my wife was saying like, there's nothing in there that is impactful to me, and I'm like, they don't have the shot that we ended pretty much every spot with, which was the Navi jumping on the pterodactyl type character whose name escapes me. That was sort of like the epic shot, or when the trees falling, or when all the missiles are firing.
Yeah.
Like, we had all these like iconic shots. I
Mm-hmm.
don't feel like they have that in this. It
Mm-hmm.
feels like they're going a lot more on the dialogue side of it. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
talking, and I
Mm-hmm.
guess, I mean, maybe because they need to reintroduce the characters, but I don't know. I haven't felt the
That is a
same
good point.
warmth.
That's a good point. I don't feel I'm imbuing a lot onto this trailer, a lot of emotionality. I don't feel Jake's
Yes,
journey. I don't know Jake. I get a little sense of where he's at with his family. He has a new family now, and they're fighting
yes,
something, but
right,
that's not immediately clear either. It's
yep.
it's still very much in Sigourney Weaver's a different character now in this one, so there is a little disconnect.
Yeah, and I
Maybe
felt like, I mean, I remember that. I mean, that third trailer was all about Jake's journey. Like, we
Mhm.
basically made the
Yeah.
audience feel like Jake, and we basically said, "Okay, Jake, ready? Here we go. We're going to go to this new cut in this new land. Here, you're going to become an avatar. Here's how it works. You become an avatar, and then here's the rest of the story."
We just
And
figured this out, Keith. We did it because you know what that was? That was research saying you need
I
a human entry point
I
to hook
know.
you emotionally that then takes you on the journey to the blue people. They're
Yes,
starting now right in the land of blue people. There's not the same kind of emotional.
yes,
They're
attachment.
trying to imbue an emotional connection through through the Navi, not through a
Yes,
human.
yes. And I think I'm wondering if that maybe
Maybe,
that's what I miss a little.
maybe,
I mean, I
maybe.
don't know. I mean, it's just I
You know what?
thought the first trailer, I wish there was more that kind of drew me in. I felt like they were talking like return to Pandora, and I'm like, does anybody really have the feeling to want to return to Pandora? I felt what they should have done was talk about the experience of Avatar.
Uh-huh.
Remember the experience of
Uh-huh.
Avatar,
Uh-huh.
because that
Uh-huh.
was what sold it,
Yeah.
was going to the movies and not cheesy 3D of things coming at your face, but immersive,
Yeah.
like taking you into the movie. Do you
Yeah.
remember that experience? Are you ready to
Yeah.
do it again
Yeah.
after all these years of sitting in your house and watching things on small TVs? Are you ready to
Yeah.
be like immersed in a theatrical experience? And I felt like they kind of missed that opportunity by just saying, come back to Pandora, when I don't really know if anyone was really
Again,
clamoring
this
to
came
go
out with
back to
3D.
Pandora.
I hope people from Disney are watching this. We're just throwing gems at them left and right.
Yeah, right.
I think what they should do.
I saw it. Feel free to give me a call anytime, buddy.
As you're saying that, though, I think you're 100% right because you articulated what I was feeling was like that. And I remember the feeling at that first like friends and family screening, and when stuff was still like unfinished,
Yeah.
like oh, you had like my breath taken away. There were
Yeah.
moments where you were literally like, slack jawed.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
how do you remind people of that? Because that's the magic of
I mean, I'm just like you. I remember I saw some footage. I mean, I went to Avatar Day, and yeah, that was pretty impressive. But I still remember we were in the big theater. I can't remember the name of it. The Zanuck. Thank you. We were in the Zanuck, and it was the first first showing of the entire movie finished. And all the employees were there, and Pam Levine and Tony were nice enough to get me in there. And it was sort of like I got in there, and the movie started, and it's that sort of, I think it starts with that sweeping, over the, over Pandora, the sweeping shot. And I was just like, oh, like this is going to be a different experience than what I'm used to. And I was like you, when I walked out of there, I was like, holy shit, this thing's going to crush. It's going to
special.
Yeah. And it's the only time I've ever heard Tom Rothman say in Tony's office, you don't have to worry about it. It's going to open. Only time I've ever heard it. So anyway, well, listen, Tim, I love talking to you. I could talk to you for 3
hours. It just goes by like that.
Flies by, man. That's just how we roll, But thank you for coming on. It's great to see you.
My pleasure.
And we'd love to have you back more, obviously. And then we're gonna have to do an 88 reunion at some point, because we've had so many guests that are just all from the old building itself, and we can all talk about some of our favorite campaigns. Ooh, there's a show idea right there. All right, well, thanks again, Tim. And if I don't see you, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and we'll see you soon.
And go Pack.
Go Steelers. He almost got me there.
It was all a build up to that moment.
That was all a bit up to that moment. He got me, just tried to get me to say that.
Bye, Lydia. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.